So my talk today is titled Unlocking Trillions in Funding, Rethinking Governance of National Money Systems. And I realize that's a big claim, unlocking trillions of dollars in funding. But I think you'll see, I hope you'll see by the end, that that's not unrealistic at all. And as a group that is here focused on governance of the commons, I'll be interested in having your feedback on that. So about me, I'm a graduate student at Duke University studying in an interdisciplinary master's program called Graduate in Liberal Studies, where I study the ecological, social, and economic impacts of monetary systems. And I'm also part of the Money Justice Collaborative, a research, education, and strategy group for social movements that want to incorporate a money system lens into their work. And my question for you today, as people involved in governing the commons, is whether or not money creation is a piece of the puzzle that you think is worth studying as part of the study of the commons and its governance. I think it is, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts about that. So just to help with that, I want you to bring into your mind the commons that you study, the fisheries, the forests, the climate, the internet, whatever it is, and ask, is money a problem in the management of that resource? Are you experiencing something like not enough money for the solutions or too much money in going into harmful activities? And then I want you to ask, how much money would be required to fund really awesome stakeholder engagement and resource stewardship in the commons that you study? Are we thinking, is it millions? Is it billions? Is it trillions? Is it quadrillions, of money to pay for really good stakeholder engagement and resource stewardship? And then I want to ask you, did you know that every single year in the United States, and it's true in other countries as well, but this is the number for the United States, that very large amounts of money are being created and added to the economy? In the US, every year between 2016 and 2019, it was $21 trillion per year. Now, just to put that in perspective, $1 trillion is $1 million. If you were to spend $1 million per day for 2,500 years, you will not have spent $1 trillion. So $21 trillion is being created and added to the economy every single year. And that's an opportunity to direct that funding into things that would protect the commons and serve public well-being. So when people hear that, when they hear that there's huge amounts of money being created every year and put in the economy, most of the times there are three questions that quickly come to mind. One is, where does that money come from? The second one is, where is it all going? And the third one is, why does it matter? So first of all, where does that money come from? The thing that most of us think, and about 80% of people in one study that surveyed 22,000 people, most of us think that money is created by the government or the central bank. And that's not entirely wrong. There's about 10% of the money supply in most countries is government created. That's your cash, your bills, and coins. And if you go look on any central bank websites like the Federal Reserve, you'll see that. They will tell you. So what is the rest of the money? The rest of the money exists only as electronic numbers in bank accounts. It's called bank money or bank credit or bank deposits. I'm going to call it bank money here because that is helps distinguish it from the other types of money. So where does bank money come from? Well, first of all, I'm going to just say, don't worry. I'm going to go through this very quickly. And if you don't catch it all, that's fine. There are two great resources where you can get the details. One of them is from Positive Money in the UK. And the other one is a book called Where Does Money Come From, produced by the New Economics Foundation. These are both about the UK, but the United Kingdom's monetary system is the blueprint upon which the United States and many other countries have established their money systems. Which is why when we want to learn about it, it's helpful to know that one of the seminal pieces about it was written by the Bank of England, the central bank that many central banks in the world are modeled on, titled Money Creation in the Modern Economy, that is cited in over 2,000 academic articles and books today. It's where I first learned about this because what it does is it says quite clearly that whenever a bank makes a loan, it creates a deposit in the borrower's account, thereby creating new money. It then goes on and it shows with some diagrams how this works. So when a bank makes a loan, what it explains is that the bank's balance sheet just grows on both sides. So if you're not familiar with balance sheets, that's okay. Don't worry about it. What you'll see is that that's the before lending picture, and this is the after lending picture. And this is a diagram just taken straight out of that paper, Money Creation in the Modern Economy. And what you're seeing there is that when the bank makes new loans, the loans are recorded as assets on the balance sheet of the book of the banks. And then the bank creates new deposits on the deposit side, and that's just your bank money, your electronic money that only exists in the records of banks. So let's just take a little bit more of a human perspective on it. What happens is you walk into a bank and sign a loan contract. The loan officer types the amount of loan into the bank's software, and the bank accounting software increases the customer's account balance by the loan amount and saves the loan contract as an asset of the bank. No money is taken from any other account when making the loan, and no central bank reserves are touched. So obviously, if this was the end of the story, then there'd be no limit to how much banks can create, and banks would never go under, and so on. So there are limits to how much banks can create. The first one is that banks cannot create money for themselves or to cover losses. They need willing and creditworthy borrowers to take out loans from them, and then they make money on the interest. And when there's high interest rates, that discourages borrowers. Right? So the availability of willing and creditworthy borrowers can be influenced by people's interest in borrowing, but also the interest rates that are set by the central bank. Banks also have preferences for how fast they want to grow, how profitable they want to be, how much risk they want to take. So for example, it might be that they don't want to serve a particular population or particular area because it's just not profitable enough. And so that would limit the amount of bank money creation certainly in that area. And then there are government regulations that also limit how much banks can create, or really how fast banks can create money. So importantly, there are a couple of things that do not limit bank money creation that are popularly believed to limit bank money creation. The first one is the presence of pre-existing deposits. So as you see here from the Federal Reserve, private money creation by banks enables lending to not be constrained by the supply of cash deposits, right? Because it's loans that create deposits, not the other way around. The other thing is that does not actually limit bank money creation is central bank reserves. As the Bank of England says here, in no way does the aggregate quantity of reserves directly constrain the amount of bank lending or deposit creation. So where does the money go? Let me just say on this, the reason I'm pointing these two out is that in many textbooks, they actually teach a story about bank money creation that is not correct. And that's not me saying that, that's the Bank of England saying it's, quote, not an accurate description of how money is created in reality. And that's talking about the money multiplier story, where a bank takes in deposits, sets aside some with the central bank in reserves, and then is able to lend out more as a multiple of that. That story is, quote, not an accurate description of reality, which is the truth. So where does it all go? Where does all that money go? Well, let's turn now to the European Central Bank. On their website, What is Money? You can go and read it. And what they explain is just what the Bank of England said. If a commercial bank grants you a loan to buy a car, they create money in this way. And when you repay the loan, the money created disappears. That's the part that really surprised me and surprised many people. The amount that's repaid in principal simply goes out of existence. And why that is because the process that created those deposits in the first place is simply reversed. The loan contract is diminishing in value every time a loan is repaid, and ultimately it goes away completely, and what is left is the reserves and the profit that was paid in by the borrower. So why does this matter? the reason is that there is a Copernican revolution happening in the field of economics, in particular in the field of macroeconomics, which is kind of country level economics. And just like with Copernicus, who's the one who argued that it was the sun going around the Earth going around the sun rather than the sun going around the Earth, and he was uh, correct, but it was a heresy at the time. It went against all the models of how the world worked. We have a very similar situation right now where there are banks and central banks and economists who are saying, hey, wait a minute, our models that assume that banks are lending out deposit savings are not correct, and we need to update them because this really changes our understanding of the relationship between money and the economy. And here's what I'm talking about. As I said, what most of us believe is that the government creates the money and that there's a relatively fixed amount of money that they create. And in fact, it's bad if they ever create more because that causes inflation. At least this is what we believe. And that the economy is just circulating that relatively fixed amount of money between businesses and consumers. And this is actually a picture that you'll find in the opening chapters of many economics textbooks. It's called the circular flow diagram, and it shows just a fixed amount of money being circulated. There's no place where money is being added or taken away. Now, the truth, given what we just learned from the Bank of England, is that the economy is actually better to be thought of as something that is spinning within the flow of money going from lending to repayment. And that this flow is profoundly shaping economic activity as the money is being created. Because every time a bank makes a loan, they are choosing to either invest in one thing or another, generally on the principle of what's going to make them the most profit. And remember, when I say that the economy is being spun by the money supply, we're talking about really large numbers here. This is $21 trillion of investment decisions being made every year. Just to put that in perspective, the federal budget is between $4 and $5 trillion in the same years that this was talking about. So why does it work this way? It's a very reasonable question. Many people ask. And over the last 300 years, governments have delegated the legal privilege to create their nation's money supply to banks. That's why it works this way. Our governments have set it up this way. And this way of doing it is only about 300 years old. It started, the first anybody knows, in 1694 in the United Kingdom. And there's reasons why it exists this way. There have been proponents since the beginning who've said, hey, businessmen know best how to evaluate risk and pick investments that will grow the economy. And so, we should leave it up to them to know when to put more money into the economy. And another argument has been that this is great because the money supply can expand and contrast, in sync with economic activity. And another common argument is that the government can't be trusted with the power to create money. It'll give them too much economic control and they'll always cause inflation with it. There are people who argue back against that and say, actually, the incentive for banks is to lend in ways that create high short-term profits and not really worry about the long term. And then when things downturn, pull back on lending, which just makes the downturn even worse. So it causes booms and busts to create money this way. Also, there are many economic historians who point out that actually there are many governments that have done a better job of guiding money creation into real economic development than banks. There are many who would argue that over the increasingly deregulation era of the last 50 years, that banks have put more and more of their investment into the stock market and speculation rather than into investing in actual factories and farms and so on. So another reason that people say it's not a great system is that there are alternatives. There are other ways it could be done, and it doesn't require concentrating it all with the central government. Just as governments have delegated the privilege to create money to for-profit private banks, they could instead delegate it to not-for-profits or public banks that have a public interest mission. Another reason that people point out that this is a problem is that having a bank money creation system requires that people be in debt in order for there to be money. Money is only created when someone takes out a loan. So for every dollar of money that's in circulation, someone is in debt. So when I say that governments delegated the legal privilege to create money to banks, what am I talking about? That's not a legal privilege that most of us have ever heard about. And what I'm talking about is called the monetary system, and that is the laws and institutions and practices that define how a specific currency is created, exchanged, and controlled. So, that includes laws that, for example, designate banks as the ones who can create bank money and the only ones who can create bank money. And then they delegate, who it is that gets to make the choices about when and for what purpose that money is created, which again is banks making those decisions. And then there are resource users, which are those of us who are trying to get access to that inflow of money for various activities. And then there's, this is a flow system. So the amount that can be added, has to balance with the amount that's being taken out. So if you look at this particular monetary system and this legal structure and these institutions, you can ask a question like, what is the logic of this system, the governing logic? And the governing logic is this, that when there's a business opportunity and resources are available to do it, but there isn't enough money to pay for it, it's good to create money as long as it's profitable for a bank and it does not cause financial instability or inflation. That is the logic of this current system. And it's based on the idea that what's good for banks is good for the rest of us. If banks are making a profit, then the economy is going to zoom. What it also means, though, is that we have things that get invested in our economy simply because they're profitable, not necessarily because they're great for us. So, for example, we need to be getting off of fossil fuels in order to stabilize climate, but fossil fuels are very, very profitable, and so banks have lent $8 trillion to the fossil fuel industry since the Paris Climate Accord was signed. Investing in land, in the Amazon, and whatever else, these are all very profitable business ventures, and banks lend for them generously. Whereas low or no profit activities like renewable energy projects that are going to pay back over 30 years, or the management of commons lands, or public services like public housing, these types of things are not very profitable. And so to the extent that money is available for them, it's because someone else borrowed money for a fossil fuel project or something that's profitable for a bank, and then that was taxed and is spent on those other activities. So what's the solution? If you don't like that picture and that outcome, as frankly I do not, what's the solution? Well, researchers have been looking into the past and present systems on Earth for the ways that this works, and it turns out that they're not all the same. There's lots of nuances, and there are radically different systems, and there are also very similar but nuanced systems that make a big difference. So just like in governing any commons that you study, when it comes to money, there are better systems and there are worse systems. And so just to give you a sense with money creation, when we do workshops in the Money Justice Collaborative, we've asked groups to, individuals to evaluate on a scale of 1 to 10 how they like each of 5 different monetary system paradigms. And, what we see is that there's not usually a perfect agreement on what's best, and that's going to be familiarity with governing the commons. But interestingly, there's almost universal agreement on what is the worst, and that is today's bank money creation system. And this has been validated by a survey of 22,000 people that found that 86% of people disapproved when they learned that it is actually banks that create over 95% of the money supply in their country. So which one is the best? Well, obviously there isn't perfect agreement because it depends on your context, your priorities, your values. If your goal is profit maximization, then maybe the current system is the right one for you. If you're a dictator king, you want a system that's going to give you ultimate power and control. If you're focused on developing the human potential and the resource potential of your nation or your community, then a different system might be ideal for you. If you're just focused on economic growth, export, import, whatever it is that'll make the economy grow, you want maybe a different system. If you're focused on national security, again, democracy, well-being for all, you might want to do it a little bit differently. Certainly, if you were looking to try and secure ecological sustainability, you might want to have it work a little bit differently, at least explicitly take ecological sustainability into consideration. So these don't have to be mutually exclusive, of course. Actually, one of the most common monetary system designs that was found in many global north countries in the last century was really explicitly focused on these four things: development, economic growth, national security, and democracy. And here I'm talking about the 1930s and 1970s in Belgium, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, Korea, Mexico, Netherlands, Norway, the United Kingdom, the United States. You can read about all of these in these two papers that I've listed here. But generally, they were using a type of monetary system design that still had banks, but the banks' lending decisions were being guided within what's called credit policy or credit guidance, where the government was basically saying, lend a little more over here, lend a little more to that sector over here. Okay, don't lend so much to the luxury housing market right now. We have enough luxury housing, lend more to public housing, and so on. And basically that system says, when there's a need to do something and the resources are available to do it, but there's not enough money to pay for it, it's good to create money as long as it, serves our development or growth or national security or democracy goals and protects against financial instability and inflation. That's basically the governing logic of that era. And we saw very low inflation, very high growth rates, and improving inequality or reduced inequality, very high public investment, very strong industrialization, and urbanization in many of these countries that were doing this during that time. Now, whether or not you think all of those things are virtuous is beside the point. The things that they were hoping to have accomplished with this way of creating money were happening. And if you were to, listen in, as some of these historians here have done, to the minutes of their meetings and so on, what they were saying is things like this. It's not wise to let, the needs of our nation and our people go unmet when the resources are available to meet them simply because there isn't enough money units to pay for them, right? And, that really resonates with me because in my community, we have many unemployed youth or just younger people, and we have, many elder folks who need care. We have a healthcare system in the community that could definitely teach them how to provide really good care, the youth. And that's not happening simply because there aren't enough monetary counting units, available to pay for that particular work. Another type of thing that they were saying is, it's okay to let banks make some of the decisions because we don't want to centralize everything, but we should cap how much interest banks can charge and give advantages to nonprofits and public banks. So, for example, this chart on the right here is actually a chart of the tens of thousands of not-for-profit, publicly owned credit unions. They're member-owned credit unions that were spun up in the United States during that time. To make sure that money creation was happening in ways that served communities and for a public interest mission. So just to say that it isn't all one way or all the other way. It's not all government or all banks. That's why I wanted to show you this example. So can we do even better than that, though? And that's a question that a number of researchers have been tackling over the last 5 years in particular, and saying, can we take some of the benefits of those systems and pair them with what we know we need to do in order to meet the urgent needs of our time? So securing well-being for all, securing ecological sustainability, doing development in ways that doesn't harm the planet so much, and so on. And so that's a research agenda that is ongoing, and I think it would really benefit from more scholars of governing the commons to participate in that research agenda. But again, the question is for you to decide if you think this is a piece of the puzzle worth studying. And if you do, I hope that you will either personally participate in it or encourage other people to join that research project. And if you want to join the conversation, as I say, there is a growing discussion among academics about the need to revive lessons learned from other eras, particularly progressive monetary reforms of the past, such as limiting the power of private banks to create money and restoring public control over money creation. So these are just a few papers that can get you started from both economics and history and law. But I just want to note that, I don't think you and anyone else is just looking for yet another thing to study. The goal is to really do something, is to make a change here. So how does, researching in this area have the opportunity to help make change, and how can you help make change? So you may be familiar with Donella Meadows' work, Thinking in Systems. She is a scholar of, systems. And she wrote this book in which she identified 12 ways to influence and change complex systems, like our massive monetary system. We have money as one of the most interconnected systems, or it's connected to every system basically on the planet. How do you change something so big? And she identified 12 points of leverage and put them in order, saying, these are the highest leverage items, and then there are these other lower leverage items. And so what I want to do is just show you where we already are just in this presentation, in this conversation, relative to these points of leverage, so that you can see where plugging in could make a really big difference. So the first thing that she says, the highest point of leverage, is to expand the view. Break out of the thinking that there's only one way or even one best way to create money, right? As long as we're believing that money is just this thing there's only one way it's created by the government, it's always been this way, and so on, we can't even see all the other options. And once we can see all the other options, that's very helpful. But we need, academics and other folks who can help then evaluate across all those many options, kind of what are the different qualities of them, so that our leaders and the citizenry as well, can form informed opinions about what might be best. So another one that we've already talked on, just jumping to number 3 here, is changing the goals is one of the ways you change the system. So as I mentioned, right now, the overarching goal of our current system is to maximize profits for banks, with the idea that will trickle down to economic well-being for everyone else. But as I showed you, there are already researchers and scholars who are focused on asking, are there other systems that can center other goals, and they're finding them and putting forward the opportunity for our leaders to choose systems that align with different goals. But this second one is one that I really like, and I think we need a lot of help with, and that is challenging assumptions. So this is exposing the beliefs that keep the current system in place. And what am I talking about here? To change the system, we have to challenge the assumptions that maintain it. This is what Donella Meadows says. So just in this presentation, we've seen a number of assumptions challenged, right? That there's a relatively fixed amount of money to actually money's being created all the time in huge quantities. Or money is primarily created by the government to money is primarily created by banks. Or banks lend out depositor savings versus banks create 100% of the deposits that they lend. Or it's bad to create new money versus it's bad to let important needs go unmet due to a shortage of mind-created monetary counting units. So this is changing our understanding of these things. Requires research, but it also requires a lot of stakeholder engagement and bringing this information to folks, convening people to look at the situation so that they can then choose different goals, and in particular then from those goals choose different institutions and so on. And so this is just one of the areas where I think you can immediately begin helping support this systems change work. You can share this video, you can share this slide, you can share some of the information that I've linked to, these papers and other things, to help get this project moving forward immediately. And then pick one of these aspects of any of these past few slides that you might want to dig into, perhaps by looking at a single monetary system, or perhaps looking at a particular aspect of different monetary systems and how, say for example, stakeholders are incorporated or not, or institutions are constructed or not. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope that was useful. And if this looks like a puzzle piece you'd like to work on, I'd love to be in touch with you and can certainly connect you with even more scholars than are in those papers that I just mentioned. Thank you for your time.